Hey there, folks. My name is Jay Frost, and I wanted to suspend the mystery. It looked like you weren't able to see or hear anything except my name. We certainly didn't mean to do that to you. So we had a little preview, running slides to tell you a little bit about how you can engage today. We'll make sure that's running for you in the next episode. If you're new to this little party, my name is, again, Jay Frost, and I'm the host of the Philanthropy Mastermind series brought to you by DonorSearch. And you'll see also on your screen popping up right now is our friend Andrew Olson, who will be, of course, sharing a bit about his work in a moment. I do want to provide a little introduction to him as well. But first, I wanted to welcome you. And since you already found where the chat is, I hope you'll keep using that as a way to engage with one another throughout. Also, you can use the Q&A at any point to post questions to make sure we don't miss them during the course of Andrew Olson's presentation. Of course, you know why you're here today, and so I won't belabor that, but what I will do is I want to make sure I tell you two things. First of all, that Andrew is known to us for many reasons. He's, of course, a best-selling author, in fact, the author of, among other things, the 101, biggest mistakes nonprofits make and how you can avoid them, which I have on my shelf, and I hope you'll have on yours. He's also a celebrated podcaster in this space, a friend to many of us through much of his work throughout the years, and today serves as the Senior Vice President at Dickerson Baker, where he's bringing his ability to help nonprofits manage the shores and shoals of nonprofit fundraising today, really in a dramatic and successful way. He's going to be telling you a bit about that in today's presentation, which is CFRE accredited. So I hope you're gathering up those credits and doing so through this series. You'll find that there's a recording of this session that will be placed over at the DonorSearch site. That's at donorsearch.net under the resources tab in just a couple of hours after it's concluded. And copy the slides if Andrew's willing. We can get those to you as well. Just be on the lookout for an email from us, and you'll see that come your way, and that'll have links to all of that content, as well as to where you can hear about the rest of this series. But with that, I want to make sure I step away and let Andrew share what he has to share today. So thank you so much, Andrew, for being here today.
Yeah, Jay, thanks for inviting me. I appreciate the opportunity. It's good to be with everybody, and I look forward to talking with you all. I'm going to take a second and put my slides on screen.
There we go.
All right. So we're going to talk today about a better way to fundraise. And just to frame this out a little bit for everybody, over the last 20 some years, I've spent most of my career in direct response fundraising, some client side running development at Children's Hospital, and working with all sorts of organizations in the US and Canada. And one of the things I find myself, probably like a lot of you, saying from time to time is there's got to be a better way to do this. Particularly when it comes to figuring out how best to engage donors, how to deliver them value, and by doing that, how to retain more of the people that want to support our great work and not have to expend so many resources chasing new donors, chasing new opportunities, but really being able to build value for our organizations by doing a better job engaging with those who already love us and want to support us. So that's really the foundation and the framework for how I came up with this conversation and a lot of the stuff that we're doing over at Dickerson Baker with our team. What I want to talk today about within that framework is really kind of two big things. One is sort of defining the reality, right? So anytime we talk about, doing things differently and changing the way that people fundraise or engage donors, I find it's really important to actually understand what the reality on the ground is and what the data is telling us, what the indicators are that we should be listening to, and how those might change the way we do or don't engage with a particular donor or audience, a group of donors. And then the next thing that we want to do towards the latter half of this presentation is really talk about the couple of hidden opportunities to improve the way that we engage donors and build value in our donor bases. And that really comes down to kind of changing the way that we approach our supporters, thinking differently about how we build those relationships, and even at the very tactical level, reconsidering what it is that we ask people to do when we ask them to support us. There's a lot of talk about the changing landscape of philanthropy. And again, I've been in this industry for 20 some years. Many of you probably been doing this work for a similar amount of time, but even if you haven't, even over the last couple of years with the pandemic and economic challenges, we know that things are changing pretty dramatically. And we set about to study that ourselves at Dickerson Baker, but we also are looking at external data from folks like AFP and Barna and Pew, and really wanting to understand what's happening economically, what's happening from a behavior perspective, and what's happening at the charitable level to understand how our donors are behaving differently, what it is their expectations are that are changing, and how that ultimately impacts each of our ability to raise revenue for our organizations. And I don't know about you all, but as I look at everything that's going on, particularly over the last couple of weeks with these banking failures and with what we're still seeing in the overall economic climate, there's a lot to make you feel overwhelmed. And there's a lot of data coming out, even out of donor files after the pandemic. I don't know where all you all work or what kind of causes you support, but we are seeing that a lot of organizations that did really well during the height of the pandemic are starting to feel a little bit of a drop off from the donors that came on at that point. And we're starting to see some changes in retention rates. We're starting to see some changes in revenue that are ultimately give us some pause. But I also think that there are some opportunities in that as well. So let's start to define that reality real quick. Okay. October 22, AFP produced a piece of research, and one of the things that they showed that I think is worth noting and considering when we think about how we look to engage our overall donor audience and how we invest our dollars and our time to create the greatest amount of net revenue for the organizations that we support, is to think about who are the donors that are delivering the most value right now, and where are we seeing giving going up, where are we seeing it giving going down or staying flat. And one of the big things that AFP saw is that under that sort of $500 single gift level, we're seeing that the count of bodies, the number of donors giving at those levels, is decreasing. And it's not just an AFP statistic. I've seen it personally in donor files that I look at every day. And we've seen it in some other trends and some other survey data that I'll show you in a minute. Now, what's interesting and sort of masks the reality is that total dollars being given is up. But when you look under the hood, that increase in giving is really only coming from the top couple of percent of true major donors in organizations. And so, as we see those ongoing retention rates, the one thing that this brings to mind is that, if your organization is not fully invested in developing relationship fundraising strategies and really getting to understand and connect and know your donors, that's probably a pretty significant missed opportunity. And I don't think that, for lack of a better term, lower dollar donor fundraising, so folks who are giving $20, $25, $50, I don't see that area of donor bases increasing anytime soon. So I think there's a very real and important reason to be doubling down on engaging with donors who can give $500, $1,000, a $2,500, a $10,000 gift to your organization. And obviously every organization is different. Some of you may have lots of donors who can do that. Some may only have a handful, but those relationships are going to continue to be increasingly more important to you every day over the next couple of years, probably because of what we're seeing in these trends, and because I don't think they're going to reverse anytime soon. Another important insight that we stumbled upon, this was December of last year. And by the way, any of the research that I reference here, I have actually links at the end of the presentation. So when you get the presentation, you can look at all the studies yourself. But the Pew Charitable Trust, they released some research in December of last year, and they really wanted to look at a 50-year snapshot of aggregate income by U.S. households. And so they looked at lower income households, middle income, and upper income over a 50-year span. And what was really interesting is the lower income households, there wasn't significant change in their aggregate income. It was a couple of percentage points, but nothing significant. Obviously, no surprise at the top of that pyramid with higher income households, there was a lot of increase in wealth and income over 50 years. But the most concerning part for us, because it's where many organizations find the most of their donors, the bulk of their donor file happens to exist, is in that middle class, that middle income section. And what they found is that over 50 years, that group had lost an aggregate 47% of their total wealth over that half century. So as we think about that, I think the couple of concerns and the sort of whistles and bells that go off for us are there are more charities than ever before. Most of us are competing now for a shrinking group of potential supporters. And by every other indicator that I've seen in the industry, we're continuing to see the number of bodies, the number of people being generous and giving to charitable causes declining. And those people are also have a shrinking share of wallet with which they can give to charity. So all of that means we're chasing an ever smaller pool of donors and dollars. And I think that's problematic and warrants that we think differently about how we both prospect to find new donors, but also how we build relationship to engage the donors that are already closely held to us. So we at Dickerson Baker in September of 2022 conducted what we call our Donor Insight Study. And it's a study now that we've done 3 or 4 years because we started it early on in the pandemic to figure out what donors were feeling and thinking about the economy, about what was going on in the country, and how that might affect their charitable giving. And then we continued it since to make sure that we fully understand how the charitable giving community is kind of coming out of that and what that means for giving. And so it's been very consistent with what we see in actual giving data over time. But this chart is pulled from that research, and what's important here is just a validation that what we're seeing is that the lion's share of giving, while there are still many donors giving below, say, $500 or $1,000 to many organizations, that income for charities is flat or down. And given that flat is actually probably 7 to 9% below what it was a couple of years ago, simply because of inflation, it means that if you're not increasing at the top of your pyramid, you are seeing effectively a decrease in total dollars, total net as well. And as we went through the survey and looked at the results, what we saw is that major donors, by and large, said, we see what's happening in the economy, we see what's happening in our communities, and we will at least maintain our giving. But many of them told us that they would actually give a little bit more in the future, going into the year end 2022 and even into 2023. And really because they saw and felt a significant need still on their communities. But again, what this reconfirms is if we're not fully investing in building those relationships and in doing the things that actually allow us to get proximate with those major donors, those people who can give us 4, 5, 6, 7-figure gifts, then what we're going to experience is not just attrition in number of bodies on our donor files, but in total revenue given and total dollars available to actually accomplish our missions. One of the really interesting things also coming out last year is from the Barna Group, and they tend to do a lot of research in the faith-based community, and I don't know, maybe some of you all work for faith-based organizations, but they were particularly looking to understand why people give. There's the old adage that people give because they're asked, and I think there's a lot of truth in that. In the direct response world, people like me would say things like, well, if you have a good offer, someone will give to you, and that's also true. But what Barna stumbled on, and I think is really important for how we talk to our supporters and how we engage them differently in the future, is when they rank ordered the reasons why people give, what they found is that the things that we typically talk about, being asked, having a good offer or a good case for support, those actually ranked really low, 10 and 5% respectively, for percentage of donors who give that because of those things. What was really insightful is that the donors essentially said that 73% said that they gave because of who they see themselves to be, meaning they believe themselves to be charitable, and therefore they gave to reinforce that belief about themselves. And so as I and our team kind of sat and stewed on that, what we were thinking is, oftentimes when we as organizations are putting out messaging, when we're engaging with donors, there's a lot of talk about what we are doing and what our institution is doing. And even when we try to do really well at being donor centric, we might, use their name more. We might say the word you more, but we don't necessarily talk to our donors about their generous identity and why that's important and how we can help them live that out by giving in support of our cause or organization. And so I think, what we learned from this and where we're starting to do some testing is that when you can lean into that idea of supporting the donor in their own personal identity of generosity and what that means for them in their overall, philanthropic journey, I think you stand a much better chance of actually not just securing a first gift or an additional gift, but really starting to become that donor's charity of choice, because you then are reinforcing to them how they see themselves. And when you do that, the connection you're able to make there, I think, is actually really significant. Excuse me. So let's talk a little bit about some of what we're calling the hidden opportunities that I think will probably resonate. You'll probably say, well, duh, that makes sense. But I think these are also things that we don't often see a lot of organizations leaning into. So the first area is we talk about, what's the top of wallet strategy and how do we become not just the, one among many organizations that a donor might support, but how do we become the organization where if the donor is falling on hard times economically or having some sort of challenge where they might want to pull back in their giving, how do we become the charity that they say, I'm going to pull back on everything else, but I'm going to continue to give to this organization? And so we want to talk a lot about how we form that kind of bond with our donors, and all of that starts with really a relationship forward approach. Okay, I want to pause real quick because Jessica France had a great question. She said, whose job is it to make individuals think about themselves as charitable givers, and how can the nonprofit organization help with that? That's a great question, and it's a very philosophical question. I think ultimately that's probably something that the individual her or himself thinks about first. But as sort of guides along their charitable journey in your respective organizations, you have an opportunity to speak to your supporters in a way that helps them understand that you actually see them for who they believe to be. And it's not necessarily your job to make them think about that, more so that you can use language and messaging and the way that you engage with them to reinforce what they likely already feel about themselves. And I think thereby improve the likelihood of them feeling more connected to your organization. So one of the first ways to become top of mind and top of wallet for the organization or the donors that you want to engage with is by really leaning into emotional storytelling. And this is something, obviously, many of us know. There's a ton of research and data on storytelling and how it impacts fundraising. But the why behind it, I think, is really important. And it's really three different things that happen in the brain when someone is engaged with a story. And this data comes from Harvard Business School. And again, there's a link to the research at the end of this presentation. But there are three chemicals that are released when you engage someone with story. First is cortisol, which actually helps you formulate the memory so that there's recall about the story with which you're engaging someone. The next is dopamine, which dopamine elicits the emotional response. It takes us from logic to emotion. And then oxytocin, which supports empathy. Now, when we do this right, and when we effectively tell stories that both highlight the mission and the work that we are about, but also connect the donor into that story in a very concrete and emotional way, what you're doing there is you're creating an imprint in the donor's brain, and thereby becoming memorable and connecting that with a positive feeling. Because the other thing that all of these three chemicals end up doing is they actually create feelings of positive feelings that mimic other sort of similar kind of emotional responses that they would have had previously, and cause the donor to feel good, right? So even when we tell a compelling, sad, hard to hear story, when told well, those three things are still triggered, and it creates the same thing. It causes us to be memorable, it causes the donor to have an emotional response. And you all know this. You're all, experienced fundraisers. You know that you can't logic someone into a gift. And so it really is that emotional response that we have to elicit. And then the ability to create empathy with the donor through the language that we use and through the stories that we tell, so that they actually feel connected to whoever it is that the story is about. If you are an animal rescue organization, then that story is about that dog or cat that your organization is rescuing and bringing to a safe place. If you're about serving the homeless in your community, it's about that person on the street who is down on their luck and hasn't had a meal in 3 days, and it's because of your organization and that donor support that they're actually able to find shelter for the night, to get a hot meal, and to start to put their life back together. Those are the kind of things that when wrapped in a compelling story, cause the donor to actually respond in a positive way and to see your organization and your mission in a good light. I'm going to pause for one other. Let's see. Oh, never mind. We answered it. One of the other areas that jumps off of this really is using data to drive our strategy, to drive our stories, to drive really every experience we have with donors. And what we have found through testing is that personalization creates relevance for the donor, and that relevance creates and deepens the connection that the donor feels with your organization and your cause. So let me give you an example of that. I worked with an organization a while back that spanned quite a large geography, right? From Santa Barbara, California, down to the San Diego area, to the U.S.-Mexico border. And if you know anything about Southern California, that stretch of the country, there's 4 or 5 different types of geography there, topography. There's lots of different demographics and lots of different communities in that area that don't necessarily see themselves as one, monolithic group. And so if you are fundraising in that area, you actually need to talk to people in different communities in a different way and show them that you understand and know who they are, where they are, what the differences of experiences are in a place like Central California near Santa Barbara versus, say, San Diego or downtown Los Angeles. I mean, those are very different communities with very different needs and challenges. And so if you are, if you're using messaging and engagement that is just one size fits all, you're not going to connect with people at the same way. But if you're able to capture data and understand what's going on, not just at the market level, but also in the donor's life, if there are signs and indicators that you are getting when you engage donors back and forth, and you're capturing that, you can then use that to, as I say here, to importantly know them, to show them that you know them, and thereby win them. Another example of this would be, I talk to a lot of organizations who say, well, I have these donors who only ever give at, Easter time and Thanksgiving. And yet I send them 35 mailings a year and 5 newsletters and 47 emails. And I just feel like it's too much. Well, if the donor is communicating with you and telling you by their behavior that they only want to give at a couple of different times of the year, you ought to use that data to your benefit and to theirs to give them a better experience. Similarly, again, I'll use the animal welfare example. If someone is a cat person, they're likely not a dog person, or vice versa. And we see that bear out in the data all the time. And so one of the things that I think a lot of animal welfare organizations do really well is that they customize their messaging, they customize their communications for their supporters based on those preferences that they know about their donors. The same thing could be true in healthcare, could be true in really kind of any different segment of our sector, where if we're capturing that data, if we're listening to the right indicators, that are not just what's my average gift, what's my response rate, did I come to an event or not, although those can be informative and important, but it's also the actions that people take or don't take around those things that give us insights that many organizations probably don't pay enough attention to. But you can use those pieces of information to then craft a much more relevant to the donor experience for them, whether that's a face-to-face meeting, a phone call, or some sort of direct response engagement, to really make your communications come alive to a donor in the way that they come off with the idea that, wow, this organization, like I'm not just one of 30,000 donors or one of 100,000 donors that supports them, but they actually know who I am. And it's not just about that they personalize my name when they sent me an appeal letter. The next area that I think is really important is what we call kind of getting beyond the checkbook. And it's really about how we engage donors around their assets. And so, assets being things that aren't cash, right? So all of those different parts of a donor or an individual's wealth that sit outside their checkbook or their credit card. And I suspect many of you, maybe all of you, are familiar with Dr. Russell James over at Texas Tech. He's done quite a lot of research in this area. He probably is the expert in our sector on this issue. And there are some really interesting things that we've learned in our engagement with him and with organizations that are doing this well. So the first, I think, is that when we talk about this, the real reason that I focus on this idea of assets is simply it's where the money is, right? So about 10% of all wealth in the US is held in cash. Yet most of us, when we're engaging donors, are asking them to give from their cash, right? We're saying, please write us a check, please send us a gift via your credit card. Even when we make a major donor, a major gift ask, oftentimes the assumption, the default is simply, would you like to write a check for this gift? When in reality, 90% of all wealth sits outside of those pools of income and dollars. And if we think differently about this, we can stop all chasing after the same decreasing 10% and really expand both the donors thinking about giving and also our organizations, and thereby make some pretty significant impact. And what I think is fascinating, and some of the data that Dr. James discovered, is that when organizations start to ask for asset-based gifts in addition to cash, and so that might be as simple as inviting a donor to give from their donor advised fund. It might be inviting them to consider giving an IRA distribution, or transferring stock to your organization. Could be real estate, any type of non-cash asset. What he found is that when organizations do that, when they move from cash only to cash and assets, over 5 years, the organizations that did that actually raised over 2 times as much as those that didn't. So it could have a pretty dramatic impact on your overall revenue. I also, as a data point, there's a couple of different organizations that I worked with in the last year or two that are both national and international in scope, and who have seen fantastic results. So one organization is an international medical charity. They saw 10 figures of additional revenue come in simply by focusing on asking their donors, and really everyday donors, right? Not just 6 and 7 figure supporters, but run of the mill, everyday average, supporter, to consider giving from a donor advised fund if they had one. And 10 figures of revenue later is a very successful program. There's another organization that deals with neglected and oftentimes abandoned children that I've worked with. They're a national organization, and they saw about a 30% increase in their total operating revenue by doing the same thing. There are many different examples of this. I've worked with a couple of rescue missions that were able to take a donor from giving $2,000 or $3,000 a year to $85,000 and $100,000 by opening up their minds and just simply showing them that if they gave a gift from their assets, they could make a much more significant impact for the organization. And the other value of it is it actually helps the donor. So there's, most donors don't give because of the tax incentives, but savvy donors like to take advantage of any tax incentive they can get. And so when a donor gives from their assets instead of their cash, they're able to extract also a personal value related to the taxability of those gifts that's different from giving in cash. So if your organization is not doing this or not leaning deeply into it, I think it's something that you ought to seriously consider. The other thing that we see is that once a donor begins to give from their assets, they tend to continue giving that way. And it also cements the relationship differently, where they there's a much greater likelihood that you retain that donor over time, because they then see themselves as an investor in your organization versus simply someone who's giving a transactional gift. So there's a question, Jessica, again, thank you. The question is, can you give examples of how asking for assets could come up in a conversation? For example, I don't know if they have a DAF or stocks, or how do you ask for it? So I think it could be fairly simple, right? So, it might be as simple as saying, Sarah, thank you so much for your commitment to give us $10,000 towards this project. A lot of our supporters like to give those gifts from their donor advised funds, or even from a stock portfolio where they might have appreciated assets. That's both a benefit to you as the supporter from a tax perspective, but it's also good for us. Is that something you might be interested in? It could be something as simple as that. Other organizations actually put those kind of messages even into their direct response communication. So you may run across organizations that simply have a little tick box on their reply device that says, check here if you'd like to give a gift from your donor advised fund. And it can be those, as simple as those things. Even when I prepare major gift proposals that come with a pledge form, we also make sure that all that information is on the pledge form, right? So, the donor can select to give from their donor advised fund, and you put your tax ID there, so it makes it really easy for them to figure that out and make the distribution. Same thing with stocks, right? So if you're asking for stock, you can put on your pledge forms, who your broker is and how they can transfer directly to you that way. So it makes it a really seamless and easy transition. And I think the actual question live is as simple as I mentioned. Doesn't have to be super complicated, and certainly can just be an easy. I like to always talk about the fact that other donors do it and other donors find benefit in it, because that again relates to the donor and reminds them that they're not the only one considering this, and B, others who give gifts like them are giving them in this way because it's good for them. And so by sort of connection, that then they make the leap that it'd be good for them as well. So that's how I would typically approach it. This is just a little bit more confirmation from the same research that I mentioned earlier, related to sort of the impact that we see in organizations going from only asking for cash to asking for non-cash gifts. And I don't mean that to suggest that you shouldn't ask for gifts of cash. Certainly still do that. It's really more of a both and engagement and scenario versus only one or the other. But we see that when you ask for both, the total value and the total growth in the revenue that you get is significantly stronger. And as all of us are chasing retention improvements right now, the fact that people who end up giving from their asset bases stick around much longer because of the increased connectivity they feel with the organization.
Hi, folks. I just thought I'd pop in here because it looks like Andrew's frozen for a minute. I'm sure he'll recognize that in a second, and we'll try to get through to him. But in the meantime, I did want to let you know that we do have a podcast recording with Andrew where he talks about his life and his work, including this incredible discussion about where he lives on a farm and raising animals. So I think you'll find that really interesting. We'll make sure a link to that is put in the chat, and you can take a look out for that when you have a moment. Also, once again, a recording of this will be placed up on the DonorSearch website at donorsearch.net a little later today. So we may not have a chance to edit out this portion where I'm talking to you, but at least it will be there for you so you can claim your CFRE credit. And you can also share it with colleagues who need a little nudge in the direction that Andrew was just talking about, focusing, for example, on asset-based giving as opposed to income-based giving and so forth. So with that, I want to make sure we grab Andrew because I think he's calling me right now and pull him back into the episode. So I'll be with you in 1 second. Just hold on there.
Well, I apologize, folks. I got booted out of the Zoom there for a second.
Sorry about that, Andrew. I tried to entertain folks as best as I could while you were out. So
Yeah, I don't know what
everybody's
happened,
ready.
but I apologize.
That's quite all right. And I want to make sure that you can share once again. We can't see you yet, but I'm sure your image
Yeah,
is
I'm
coming
working
any
on
second now.
that.
And you can still see me. And there we go.
I can see
And we're
you.
about to start. There you are. Perfect. Okay. Thanks so
So
much.
sorry about that, guys. All right. Well, that was fun. It looks like there's a couple of questions. Oh, thank you for your grace, everyone. Okay, so I sort of forget where I was, except to show you that, look, there's real impact in doing this way. And these are just some of what I think are fairly simple ways to engage our supporters differently, and to start to bring about a different conversation where donors feel seen, where they feel acknowledged and heard, and where we are engaging them in ways that both are beneficial for them and for our organization and those we serve, and thereby creating opportunities for donors to do something really significant, and to help advance our work in a way that may not have been possible outside of that. With that, I'm happy to answer any other questions.
It looks like there are no more questions right now, Andrew.
All right.
Are you frozen there on the video again?
I'm here now. Okay.
Okay, great. You can go right ahead.
So it looks like there are a couple of questions. One question is, how do we identify who would qualify for asset-based giving? That's a pretty broad category, right? So I will tell you that often we see that wealth and total income, things like that, correlate high with the likelihood to have a donor advised fund. But that's only one way that someone could give from their assets, right? There are a lot of people who might have, say, an individual retirement account that, once they reach a certain age, it's beneficial for them to actually transfer a portion of that annually to a nonprofit, from a tax perspective. So I would say cast the net wide. Obviously, if you're going to do something that's fairly expensive, if you're going to send a big mailing and you've got a large donor file, you might want to do some modeling to refine that and hone it in. But I honestly would offer and lift up the idea of giving from assets to just about every donor on your donor file, because you never know who might have an asset that they don't know what to do with, didn't remember they had, or didn't know that you as an organization would either be interested or capable of accepting a gift like that. So I like to cast the net wide because you just never know. So Liz asks, where are my feline supervisors that they're not on my shelf today? We do have 3 cats in the house. They're just not in the room because they make a lot of noise. Okay, what's the next question? The next question is, what can we offer by way of legacy giving? So I think, legacy giving, securing, asking for a bequest, things like that, and end of life gifts, those somewhat fit in this category. They're not exactly the same, but I think a similar conversation with supporters is really important. And what I've learned, there's an organization that deals primarily with faith-based ministry type organizations. They do work with other nonprofits as well, but they're called Money for Ministry. A gentleman named Mike Bawalda founded the organization, and they specialize in legacy giving, and in identifying the donors and creating the opportunities for them to kind of raise their hand and say that they have interest in this. What I learned a long time ago from their team is that the best way to surface those opportunities is to talk less about the giving vehicles, whether it's a remainder trust or a bequest or whatever it is, but to talk with your supporters about what it is they want to be remembered by and what kind of world they want to leave when they ultimately when they go on to the afterlife, right? So what do they want to leave for their kids, for their grandkids? How do they want to be known when they're no longer here? Those kind of things, and really engage in that kind of vision conversation, and thereby you take it out of the sort of uncomfortable financial and death conversation, and you talk more about what's most important to them, and what's the legacy they want to leave, and what's the impact that they want to leave, and those kind of things. And really that has been most successful in all the data that I've seen at driving a high number of people to have interest in that. But again, it's another one of those things where simply inviting people and reminding them regularly that they can make a gift that goes on beyond their lifetime and makes an impact for generations to come. That kind of reminder is really important. That's another thing from an identification perspective. There's a lot of data that you can get through partners like DonorSearch, and to understand who might be a high likelihood candidate for a legacy gift. But again, it's one of those things where you just never know. And so I also just like to be a lot more cast the net wide for things like that too, because there are going to be some people that you might never expect would make a gift like that. But when you approach them and remind them about it, and kind of on an ongoing basis, let them know that that's a thing that your organization accepts, and here's how it helps you create long-term impact, you get pleasantly surprised by that. So it's not something that I would sort of keep close and only talk to a handful of donors about, or only use a small audience of highly modeled names or anything like that. I think you cast that net as wide as you can. The other thing that we often see is that when a donor sees that another donor has done that, whether it's a bequest or whatever it might be, it kind of immediately rings in their brain, oh, I could do that too, right? And I see myself like those people, like that person. And so therefore, this becomes now an accessible way for me to engage this charity that I love. So I think the more that you can tell stories of how and why other donors give to you in that way, and what it means for them and for the organization and for the cause, the more likely you are to secure gifts like that. Sorry, folks, I thought my camera was on. I just didn't realize it. Okay, Dan says, wondering how much is via DAFs and foundations. If we could clarify, are you asking how much revenue, or what are, I'm not sure the question there. Oh, how much of the 90% is in those versus other assets? That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. But we do know that that there are significant dollars held in DAFs nationally at this point. I don't have the statistic in front of me. I feel like I want to say it's like $4 billion, but I could check on that and make sure that Jay has that data point after the webinar. How do you get on a donor advised fund organization's list of possible organizations to donate to? Yeah, it's a great question. I think two things. I would never leave it to the distributing organization to be the gatekeeper for you. So I think that's why going directly to your donors and letting them know that you invite them to give in this way is really important, because you don't ever want to be, sort of guarded off by a financial institution. Having said that, I've talked to a number of them, and what it comes down to, like any other giving opportunity, is relationship, right? So the more that you build relationships with people who are managing funds like this, and engaging with high net worth donors, and even with folks who are of moderate wealth, but who have a DAF or a family foundation, the more likely you are to be able to sort of become a charitable referral for them. So I think that's probably the best way, but ultimately I would say go directly to the donors and really engage them about this versus relying on anything else. And if you're not using, there's a couple of different DAF widgets that are available that you can plug right into your website, so that a donor who has a donor advised fund can give from it directly to you in a very easy way. If you're not using one of those, you should consider it. I actually prefer the MarketSmart version of it, because they don't just have the top 3 or 4 donor advised fund holders. They actually have it's in the hundreds of different foundations and community foundations and things like that host other DAFs. So but either way, check those out, because I think they're really valuable. Okay, how do we evaluate face-to-face fundraising as the best option of relating with donors and securing sustainable relationships against other strategies? Yeah, I think the data around that is pretty significant. And it comes down to, again, relationships, right? So if you only ever solicit a donor through email or through direct mail or over the phone or something like that, there's really no way to build a truly authentic relationship. That's very transactional, no matter how you slice it. And we see 2 things. When you engage a donor directly and personally, when done well, of course, those donors stick around a lot longer, so your retention rates stay a lot better. The level at which those donors give and continue to increase their giving over time is much more significant, and the relational connection you have, the access you have to those supporters, is much better than any other way of giving. So and when you look at the return on investment, right? So in the best case scenario, any other way that you might engage a donor, you're probably not going to get better than a 5-to-1 return on your dollar spent. Whereas, a major gift relationship, a face-to-face, fundraising ask, it could be exponential, right? I've seen that anywhere from 10-to-1, 20-to-1, 100-to-1 return on investment. So when you measure it against those kind of metrics, there's just no better way to really engage a donor and build a significant giving opportunity than to be face-to-face. Now, it doesn't mean you always have to be face-to-face. You have to be relationally connected, right? So we saw in the pandemic, there were a lot of organizations raising a good amount of money over Zoom or other means like that. I've got a really good friend named Roy Jones, who works for a foster care organization down in Florida, and he's got a couple donors who only want to engage with him via text message. Now, they've met in person before, and they've got a relationship that pre-exists the text, but he'll reach out to them when there's a need, explain it via text message, a couple hundred characters, couple sentences, and then a gift gets wired, right? So there are ways to do this, but that all presupposes that the donor has told you, this is the way I'd like you to engage with me. Beyond that, there's no other sort of arm's length fundraising vehicle that does anywhere near the impact that a well-trained, well-equipped major gift officer can make for your organization. And yeah, Susan says that local community foundations often have DAFs that they manage, and they can connect, you locally. That's a great idea. And I think that the more proximate you are to the organization, community foundation, or whatever, the more likely it is that you'll be able to do that. A lot of the national organizations may be pretty tough to get into. I don't know if you all are looking at the chat, but Jay says that according to the Chronicle, there's $234 billion in deaths. It's well more than I remembered. And that's a great reason why you should be asking donors to give that way. The average DAF has $182,000. Now, the distribution amount in a DAF, and many of them have minimum distributions. Sometimes it's $500. I think the lowest I've seen is $250 maybe. But in almost every instance when we've done this with our partners, we've seen the average gift given from a donor who previously did not give through their DAF, that started giving through their DAF, went up by at least fourfold, right? So there's a significant opportunity to pretty simply upgrade supporters just by asking them to give via a different vehicle. One of the other interesting things, I think, when you measure this against other foundation giving, things of that nature, we saw, I think it was last year, that DAF giving, if the average is, say, 5% distribution from a foundation, I think DAFs were giving close to 20% last year, which is really significant. Question from Denise is it at age 70 that IRA distributions give donors a tax incentive? I believe it's 70 and a half. But yes, it's right in there. So I would start talking to those donors probably a year or two before, just to socialize the idea. So if a question from Susanna is, any tips for stewarding donors who give through a DAF anonymously, meaning they don't share their home address? If you don't have the donor's contact information, I don't know of a way to do that. You certainly could try sending something to the organization that distributed the transaction to you. I don't know that you'd have much success with that. If you've got their name, and any other data points, you could probably go out and find additional information about them. But beyond that, I think it'd be pretty tough. And that's probably the number one reason I hear from organizations when they say, I don't want to do this. I don't want to push donor advised fund giving opportunities because I don't get the data. And that is true for some, you don't. But I believe that, and I've seen this with other organizations, when you have a good relationship and a good rapport with donors, it's highly unlikely that they're not going to tell you that this is coming. Certainly, if you're managing a very large donor file or a donor file organization where you've got a really transactional kind of direct mail driven program, you may not have the same kind of relational connectivity. So you might get some donor advised fund gifts that do come anonymously, where you just don't have a relationship to know who the donor is or that they were even thinking about it. But it would be tough otherwise. Jay, I love that you've got a prepackaged DAF presentation already ready to go. Tina asked, how does the DAF widget work? So the two that I'm aware of, you embed code on your website, and a donor can actually, if they have a DAF, they can go in and search for the organization that their DAF is managed through. So whether that's Fidelity or Vanguard or whoever it might be, and complete a transfer request right from that widget on your site. So, the value in that is they're prompted by an experience they have on your website. They see a compelling story, they watch a compelling video, you've got a strong call to action, whatever it is. And instead of interrupting that and having them have to go away, go call a broker, go do something else in order to make that transaction, and have a much higher potential of them forgetting or just getting distracted and not doing it at that point, if you've got that widget, it's right there on your site where they can say, oh, yeah, I'm compelled. It's checked all the boxes for me. I'm motivated. I want to do this. Oh, and they've made it easy for me. I can search for my donor advised fund here, and I can prompt the distribution immediately from that widget. So that's how it works. Technical wise, I have no idea how the code works, but that's how the experience is for the donor. Where can you get the widget? So there are a couple on the market. Like I said, the one that I recommend is through MarketSmart. So if you go to their website, I think you can download it right there. So Stephanie has a question. Do we have any suggestions for strategies to cultivate buy-in from other staff at a nonprofit regarding really diving into the process of more face-to-face major donor interactions? Great question. Yeah, so I think it starts with cultivating a culture of philanthropy first and foremost, right? So if organizations and if leaders don't believe that philanthropy is essential and that it is the lifeblood of your ability to deliver on mission, you're going to have a challenge with this. There's a link in this presentation, which I'll make available after the webinar, to a study that we did in 2021 that looked at staffing in the nonprofit sector. And one of the key insights was that organizations that are healthiest philanthropically and where fundraisers stay the longest and report being the happiest in their work are organizations where the CEO is fully invested in philanthropy. Doesn't mean that they are the senior asker. In fact, often that's probably a bad idea, but it does mean that the CEO believes in the value of it and does the things that are necessary to make that value known across the organization. So that's first and foremost, is you have to get executive buy-in, and when you do, that's great. Sometimes people just, they believe differently and don't value it the same way. The other things that I do, though, is I'd look at the numbers, right? So when you stack rank your revenue and you look at what it costs to produce $1 of charitable revenue, there's no other channel or activity that you're going to be engaged in that's going to give you anywhere near the return on investment or the total net dollars than face-to-face major gift fundraising. So if your organization is populated with people who don't believe, but who actually want more net revenue and who want a higher return on investment for their fundraising dollars and their marketing dollars, when you stack rank it and show the data that way, that's often pretty compelling, because you'll see events are going to be a 1-to-1 or a 2-to-1. Direct response is going to be, for donor acquisition, is going to be a 0.2 or to a 0.5, and for house file renewal mailings, maybe you're going to get a 4-to-1 if you're really good. And digital might be a 3-to-1, a 2-to-1, something like that. Every other channel that you could be in, peer-to-peer, those are going to be low return and often low net activities. And then you're going to have major gift face-to-face asks where the numbers are going to be really strong. They're going to be up in that 10, 20, 30-to-1, sometimes even better. Now, the caveat to that is that you're doing the work well, right? So oftentimes when I get into an interaction and somebody says to me, I'm not going to invest in face-to-face major gift fundraising, it's probably because they've seen it done poorly in the past, and they've probably seen negative results because of that. So I think, that's the other side of this coin, is we've got to make sure that we're doing the work well and actually producing the results. But, if your team and your leaders aren't willing to acknowledge that kind of work delivers significantly more net dollars so that you can accomplish mission, then I'm not sure what to tell you at that point. That should be the most compelling reason. And also, when you look at the retention rates, right? Look at retention across every channel that you use to fundraise, across every activity, and in most cases, you're going to see that the donors you retain longest are those that you have the closest relationship to. You're welcome. Folks, I'm happy to stick around and answer as many questions as you might have if there's others. Again, I'm sharing in this screen. There's a number of links in this presentation, as well as, when I talked about data that you ought to capture and be sort of listening for, I've given you some examples of that as well. So hopefully that adds some value to the work that you're doing. And then if you want to connect with me, there's 3 easy ways. You can catch me on LinkedIn. I'm always there. But here's my email address and my cell phone number as well. I'm looking calls, texts, whatever you'd like.
Thank you so much for this, Andrew. And I wanted to make sure that people had ample time to ask questions before I hopped back in here. Really appreciate all the things you're sharing today. And I also wanted to make sure the door was open for people to place anything else they want in the chat, as well as the Q&A, and especially to get your contact information so they can reach out to you after the fact. For those who missed it in the chat, Andrew was also kind enough to be once again in an episode of the podcast, which is available wherever you get your podcasts, or you can get over at DonorSearch.net, along with the rest of the content we offer in the Philanthropy Mastermind series. And I think you'll enjoy it. It's really a different slice of life and a great window on your life and work. So we really appreciate you both for everything you do for our field, and also you're being willing to kind of open up about your life and how it's impacted you. And it was really a wonderful conversation to have. So with that, Andrew, I don't know if you have any closing thoughts.
I don't think I do. With only one thing, I did see a question in here of someone
Sure.
asking how they access the presentation after. So that's more a question for you than me.
Yes. Well, thank you for that. So first of all, may we share your slides?
Absolutely.
With people
Yeah.
afterwards? Okay. I just wanted to confirm that and really ask you. So thank you for that. We will make sure to send you an email afterwards, and that will contain a link. This will be in the next 24 to 48 hours. That will contain a link both to the recording, which will be once again over at DonorSearch.net under the resources tab, but you can look there sooner, but it'll be a link to it, as well as a link to these slides. So just be on the lookout for both. While you're there, you can also see past recordings and a list of all the sessions that we have coming up, including sessions with, with Amy Eisenstein on March 21st. And we have another episode of the podcast that just dropped this week. We've talked a little bit today. Andrew, you shared a good bit about faith-based fundraising, and Paul Edwards, who does a lot of work in that arena, did a session in the podcast called A Theology of Fundraising, which is an interesting complement to everything you've been sharing with us today. So you can get all your content there. And of course, we also welcome your ideas about what you'd like to see in the series in the future. So I'll go ahead and take the liberty of also providing my email address, which is just my name, J-A-Y, at DonorSearch.net, or you can also reach me on LinkedIn, as you can find Andrew, as he said earlier. And I strongly encourage you to check out his work there, as well as at Dickerson Baker. So once again, thank you so much, Andrew. Really appreciate you.
Thank you, Jay. It's good to be with you all. Appreciate you. And I'll shoot you these slides as soon as we log off.
Great. Thanks so much. Okay. And with that, everybody, we're going to go ahead and see if we can load a few slides at the end, including a little QR code. So if you have your phones handy, take a picture of that, will you? We'd love to hear from you. So with that, we'll turn off our cameras and look forward to seeing you next time. Till then, take care, but watch the QR code.